So we've got to day 2. Day 1, success. The weather mainly held. There was one rain flurry on the way, but it wasn't too bad, in fairness. The real rain came in the evening, luckily when I was already settled in, and so I didn't get too wet. Plus I got this new jacket from Decathlon, which is nice and waterproof, so yeah. I need to get them to sponsor me one day, the amount I promote their clothes. But yes, so day 2 begins in Olsztyn, and yesterday I saw some really cool stuff. I mean, I think it was the warm-up trail, because, well, when you leave Częstochowa, it's pretty grim for the first part of the trail, to the extent that you're walking past this whole industrial estate, and I worried my lungs were going to burn because of all the fumes I was taking in. But we're past that stage now. Olsztyn itself is lovely. Yeah, I did encounter a few like rock formations and things on the way to get here, which was cool. The castle was really cool. You can't really see it properly from here, but yeah, it's basically built out of this stuff, and also it's pretty massive. It's a ruin, but a ruin that looks really cool. So that was fun to explore, even with a little bit of torrential rain at the end. But yeah, today we're going to Bobolice, which means we'll encounter at least 2 castles, maybe 3, depending on how close one falls to the route. But yeah, stay tuned for adventure to come.
Dzień dobry and welcome to A Brit in Poland. With this channel, I travel across the country, I bring you the culture, and I show you just how amazing Poland is. So I invite you on my journey. If you want to see more, I have Facebook and Instagram profiles, which you will find links to in the description below. And if you want to really help out, you can turn to my Patreon or Patronite accounts, again in the description. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Do zobaczenia. Yesterday, Olsztyn Castle had felt like a destination. This morning, it became the starting line. And that is one of the strange things about a long-distance trail. The places that feel like endings one day become things you leave behind the next. And on day 2, I was leaving Olsztyn with the longest hiking day of the whole journey ahead of me. The route quickly slipped back into the forest, then out into fields, with the low grey sky hanging over the Jura. At the time, the clouds felt a little threatening, but looking back, they were almost helping. I was still walking in a coat here. Later in the trail, when the sun came up properly, I would discover that blue skies can also be tiny golden bullies. Rain slows you down, heat drains you. On day 2, I was still deciding which enemy I preferred. This is also where the trail stopped feeling like a romantic idea and started becoming a physical routine. Walk, adjust the backpack, check the map, feel the heels from yesterday, keep going. The castles are the headline of the Eagle's Nest Trail, but the spaces between them are where the trail does its real work. By the time I reached Zrębice, I had already begun to develop a new appreciation for one of the most important pieces of hiking infrastructure in Poland, the bench. In ordinary life, a bench is just street furniture. On a trail like this, it's mercy with legs. A bench by a lake, a few minutes off your feet, a chance to drink something and pretend your ankles are still loyal members of the team. That matters more than you expect. But there is a danger with benches. The longer you sit, the more your body starts to believe the walk is over. So after a few minutes by the lake, I had to do the cruel thing and stand up again. And this brings me to the first real tip I would give anyone planning to walk the Eagle's Nest Trail. Rest before you desperately need to. Not for long, not dramatically, but you need to collapse onto every bench like a dying Victorian poet. But on a long day, small rests matter. A few minutes off your feet, a drink before you are thirsty, a snack before your stomach starts making legal threats. These things add up. This was especially true on day 2, because this was the longest stage of the whole trail. I had started early, but there was still a huge distance ahead of me. And at this point, my heels were already carrying yesterday's complaints into today's meeting. So the aim was not to walk heroically. The aim was to keep myself functional. Very glamorous, very inspiring. Put that on a motivational poster, I dare you. Between Zrębice and Złoty Potok, the route settled back into woods and fields. No major drama, no grand reveal, just the steady rhythm of a long-distance trail. Follow the marker, check the map, adjust the backpack, keep moving. And this is where good pacing matters, because once you are tired, hungry, and annoyed, every tiny problem becomes bigger. A missed marker becomes a crisis, a hill becomes personal, a closed shop becomes betrayal. So by the time I reached Złoty Potok, I was ready for a change of pace. And fortunately, Złoty Potok is not just another village on the route. It is where this episode briefly stops being about endurance and becomes something much softer. A landscape of springs, parkland, poetry, and one of the sadder family stories hidden among the trail. The name means golden stream, and it comes from the clear springs that feed the Zrębice River. After the woods and the fields of the morning, this felt like a change in register. The trail had been practical until now. Walk, rest, drink, keep moving. The estate is closely connected with Zygmunt Krasinski, one of Poland's great romantic writers. His father bought the estate in the 1850s, and in 1857, Krasinski came here with his wife and children. During that stay, his 4-year-old daughter, Elżbieta, died. She was buried in the local church, and Krasinski later named 2 nearby springs after his children, the Zygmunt string and the Elżbieta string. Then he left for Paris and never returned. That story changes how you look at the place. Without it, Złoty Potok is simply a beautiful stop on the route, a palace exterior, water, trees, and a little peace before the next long stretch. With it, the landscape becomes something more personal. A father naming water after his children, a private grief left inside a public place. I only walked around outside of the palace, so this was not a deep visit, and honestly, Złoty Potok probably deserved more time than I gave it. If you are planning this trail yourself, this is one of those places where slowing down would pay off, especially if you want to find the springs properly. But this was the longest day of the whole route, and Bobolice was still a long way away. So after the palace, the pond, and the romantic tragedy, the trail returned me to one of the most practical institutions in modern Poland, Żabka. Because on a day like this, poetry feeds the soul, but snacks keep the ankles from staging a coup. Then back onto the trail, and this is where the weather decided it also wanted a scene. The rain came in properly near the lake, not just a few polite drops, but enough to change the plan. And this is one of those lessons on the stage of the trail, that the rain is not just weather, but rain changes time. It changes your pace, your footage, your energy, and your willingness to pretend you were enjoying yourself for the camera. So when I found a lakeside arcade area with shelter and food, there was no heroic debate. I stopped. And honestly, this is the kind of stop that can save a long day. A dry place, hot food, fish cooking nearby, rain falling outside, 45 minutes where the backpack came off, the legs were allowed to stop negotiating with gravity, and the day became briefly manageable again. It was not part of the grand plan, but the best moments on a trail often are not. There was also that familiar little dance of travelling in Poland with imperfect Polish. Pointing, guessing, listening hard, smiling at the right moments and hoping you have not accidentally ordered 7 kilograms of trout. But it worked. And that became one of the quiet patterns of this day. Not always understanding everything, but still being understood enough. At Ostrężnik, that would happen again, and much later at Bobolice, it would matter even more. The practical tip here was simple. Build flexibility into long days. A rain stop with food is not wasted time, it is recovery. If you try to force the schedule too tightly, every delay feels like failure. But if you leave a little space for weather, food, wrong turns and human weakness, rude but apparently real, the day becomes much easier to survive. And on the longest day of the whole trail, this pause mattered. Because once the rain cleared, I still had a long way to go. Back into the forest, back into the hills, and towards one of the strangest castle sites on the entire Eagle's Nest Trail. Once the rain eased, it was time to move again, which is always the cruel little bargain of a long hiking day. Shelter feels wonderful, hot food feels like salvation, and then somehow after all that comfort you're expected to put the backpack on again and continue behaving like a functional mammal. Rude, frankly. But this next section was one of the most atmospheric parts of the day. The trail left the softer landscape around Złoty Potok and moved back into dense forest. Hillier, rockier, and much more enclosed. The rain had changed the mood of everything. The paths were darker, the ground was damp. The limestone started appearing more often, pushing through the forest like the landscape was slowly showing its bones. And this is where the Jura began to feel less like a walking route and more like a hiding place. There were caves along the way, rocky outcrops beside the path, and enough climbing to remind me that upland is not just a decorative word. This is another useful planning lesson for the hike. Do not judge a section by the distance on the map. A few kilometers through villages and fields is one thing. A few kilometers through wet, hilly, rocky forest is something else entirely. The pace slows, the footing matters more, and your legs begin asking why you've once again involved them in historical tourism. At this point in the day, the rhythm became very simple. Watch the path, check the marker, avoid slipping, keep going, and try not to think too much about how far Bobolice still was. Because the strange thing about the Eagle's Nest Trail is that even when you are walking towards castles, you spend a lot of time in places that feel much older than castles. Forest, rock, caves, water. The kind of landscape people would have used for shelter, fear, worship, escape and defense long before anyone decided to put walls on top of it. And then eventually I reached Ostrężnik, or at least I reached the place where Ostrężnik Castle was supposed to be. And this one is strange, because if you're expecting towers or walls, you might be slightly confused, as I was. What you mostly find is a giant limestone rock, a cave, trees, and the feeling that the castle has almost disappeared back into the landscape. And there may be a good reason for that. Ostrężnik is one of the more mysterious sites on the Eagle's Nest Trail. Archaeological work has suggested that the castle may never have been fully finished, and very little written history survives. I also met a Polish man here who clearly knew more about the trail than I did. He started explaining things to me in Polish with impressive commitment. About 30 minutes of impressive commitment. I understood some of it, probably, but the spirit was clear enough. This odd rock in the forest had mattered. A half-understood conversation beside a half-vanished castle. Honestly, that felt about right. But there was not much more to see, and there was still a pretty long way to go. So I left the mystery castle behind and continued south, through more forest, more villages, and eventually towards the 2 castles I had been chasing all day. And this was the part of the day where the distance started to feel less theoretical. In the morning, a place name on the map feels like a target. By late afternoon, it starts to feel like a small personal challenge issued by geography. The route moved on through more forest, then towards the small villages that sit between the mystery of Ostrężnik and the famous twin castles at the end of the day. First came Mirow. Not a dramatic stop, not somewhere I had time to explore properly, just one of those quiet villages that becomes part of the rhythm of a long trail. You pass houses, gardens, small roads, and maybe a few curious looks, and then the red markers pull you onwards again. And by this point, those markers mattered, because on a long day, navigation is not just about knowing the direction, it's about not wasting energy you do not have to spare. Which brings us to Moczydło, where I took a wrong turn. Not a catastrophic wrong turn, not send a rescue helicopter and notify the Queen dramatic, king these days I guess, just enough to extend the route slightly. And on paper, slightly does not sound like much, but after hours of walking, with wet forest behind you and Bobolice still somewhere ahead, every extra bit of distance feels like the trail adding a service charge. So here is another practical lesson from this day. Keep checking the route, even when you think it is obvious, especially late in the day. That is when the concentration drops. That is when your feet are tired, your brain is thinking about food, and the map starts becoming more of a rumour than a plan. Offline maps, trail markers, and a little paranoia are definitely your friends. And don't believe any of them, use them in conjunction. And they're annoying friends, but they're still friends. Eventually, I reached Mirow, and psychologically, this felt important. Not because the day was nearly over, but because it absolutely was not, but because it was the last proper village before the final push towards Mirów and Bobolice. By this stage, the day had already given me forest, rain, food, caves, a mystery castle, and one navigational little slap, but the castles I had been walking towards since morning were still waiting somewhere beyond the trees. Closed, as it would turn out, but waiting. From Mirow, the trail went back into the forest, and this final stretch had a different feeling. Earlier in the day, the forest had felt atmospheric. Now it felt like a test. There's a kind of section where you're not really sightseeing anymore. You are counting progress in small signs. A bend in the path, a marker on a tree, change in the light. The hope that maybe, finally, the next opening will reveal something medieval and dramatic. Because by now, I did not just want a castle, I felt I had earned one, possibly two. I was willing to negotiate. This is the part of a long-distance walk that is hard to explain in a normal travel video. Nothing terrible is happening, you're not lost, you're not injured, and you're not in danger. You are just tired, and tiredness changes the scale of everything. A small hill becomes rude. A muddy patch becomes suspicious. A kilometre becomes a legal dispute. And every time the path turns without revealing your destination, you begin to wonder whether Bobolice is actually real or just something invented by map makers to motivate idiots with backpacks. And then, after all of that, after Olsztyn, Zrębice, Złoty Potok, the rain, Ostrężnik, the villages, the wrong turn, and the final forest, the landscape finally gave me what I had been chasing all day, the first of the twin castles, Mirow. After all of that, even a closed castle felt like a reward, and yes, it was closed. I also tried to find food here, and that was closed too. So Mirow became less of a visit and more of a pause. a place to take in the view, let the legs briefly forgive me, and prepare for the final push to Bobolice. Mirów and Bobolice sit only about 1.5 kilometers apart, on neighbouring limestone rocks. Both belong to the great 14th century defensive chain associated with Casimir the Great, with Bobolice as the stronger royal castle, and Mirow beginning more like a supporting watchtower that grew into something larger. And of course, because two castles on neighbouring rocks are basically begging for folklore, there is a legend that they were built by two brothers and linked by an underground tunnel, a symbol of their bond. Almost certainly not true, completely worth believing for at least the length of the walk between them. So I left the ruined castle behind, still hungry, still tired, but close now. One castle down, one final castle to reach. Bobolice was waiting just over the ridge. The second of the twin castles sitting on its limestone rock just beyond Mirow, and after the longest day of the trail, it felt both very close and somehow impossibly far away. Unlike Mirow, Bobolice has been heavily restored. It was brought back from ruin in the 21st century, and today it looks almost like the castle people imagine when they hear the words medieval Poland. Towers, walls, gates, and drama. A proper fairy tale silhouette after a day that had been mostly wet socks and practical decisions. But by the time I arrived, it was closed. Of course it was. This was the reality of walking the Eagle's Nest Trail rather than touring it by car. I had reached both famous twin castles, but reached both of them too late to go inside. And the restaurant was closed too, which meant that after more than 12 hours on the trail, the great reward at the end of the day was not a castle visit, not a proper meal, but the knowledge that at least my bed was nearby. And honestly, at that point, that was enough. Almost. Because then in the car park, I met Pavel. And this became one of those small moments that no itinerary can give you. My Polish was limited, his English was limited, but between the two of us, we somehow built a conversation in the middle. He tried English, I tried Polish. Both languages suffered a little, but the friendship survived. And then he gave me beer. After the closed castle, the closed restaurant, the rain, the wrong turn, and the longest walking day of the whole journey, that beer meant more than it probably should have. Not because it was fancy, not because it sold dinner, but because it was kind. A cold beer from a stranger in a car park, shared through a broken conversation at the end of a punishing day. That is the kind of thing you remember. So day 2 ended in a strange way. I had walked all the way from Olsztyn to Bobolice. I had reached the castles too late. I had failed to find food, but I had a bed. I had survived the longest stage, and somewhere between his English and my Polish, Pavel had given the day exactly the ending it needed. Not triumphant, not polished, just human. And after a day like that, human was more than enough. In our next episode, we will take you to day 3 of the journey, and I will show you one of my favourite sites along the way, and we are going to finish in Orlich, one of the most famous locations on the journey. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like, and if you would like to continue this journey, please do subscribe. Otherwise, do check my back catalogue. I've explored more of Poland than some people know exists. So, thank you for watching. Do zobaczenia. Pa pa.